Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the season finale of Sounds of the Valley. I'm your host, Evan Claymore, and normally on this show, we have our minds firmly rooted in the present. I have artists and bands from around Eau Claire in the here and now. That's where they play their music. But the thing about music is that it's a story that's constantly being told, and we are not at page one. Music has a long, a rich tapestry of history, I should say. And here, from where I'm sitting in 2025, I figured it would be a good time to turn to the past and take a look at some of the music that has shaped this era and the eras that they're from. We got album birthdays. That's what this is. So our first batch of albums that I will be talking about, for example, you'll get the idea once we get into it. These are albums that are turning 60 in 2025. Read albums that that came out in 1965. And the thing about 1965 is it was a time of new beginnings and of transitions for most of the popular music. Rock was on the up and up for a while already, but most of the prominent rock bands of 1965, like the Beatles, which, as it turns out, the Beatles are the first group that we're talking about. The Beatles made their main transition of their career in 1965 with the doubleheader of Help and Rubber Soul. And in my mind, these are kind of the two bookends that separate the two eras of the Beatles. Before Help, you have them singing about how much they want to hold your hand. It's the Beatles, Beatlemania. They're singing about love. Good for them. I am more excited for the late career, where they stop playing live and start becoming just studio technicians full time. And that's what we start seeing on Rubber Soul over here. You gotta love Rubber Soul. This was the Beatles' first foray into psychedelic rock, which, as it turns out, psychedelic rock will become a very major player later in the 60s. But that transition is what 1965 is all about. On that note, the next album that we'll be talking about here is Highway 61 Revisited by Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan is also a very major artist that was coming up at around this time. His whole deal before this, he had the guy in the guitar shtick. He was the freewheeling Bob Dylan. He was singing about, he had his harmonica. He was singing the blues. Highway 61 Revisited, though, marked his transition into rock. This is where he went from blues, strum and blues guitar to full-on blues rock, driving. It's a great time. It's funny that I should say driving, considering it's called Highway 61 Revisited, but it's also seen as the main transition point to his his peak. Or at least what people consider his songwriting peak, with albums like Blonde on Blonde, which is actually the one that came out after this. Highlight from this one, I would say, is like a Rolling Stone. That's the one where he goes, like a Rolling Stone. That's what Bob Dylan sounds like. You can clip that. For the next group that we will be talking about, for 1965, we got The Who, My Generation. A transition, it's probably the ultimate transition, which is an entirely new band coming out of the woodwork. The Who, My Generation is The Who's debut record, which is pretty major for what turned out to be a very major player in the rock scene for at least a few decades. It's obviously before their prime, considering it was literally their first record. But My Generation, I mean, it's like the progenitor to punk rock, which we will have a little more punk later on this list. But this is kind of the beginning of that, because they were young and they were very in your face about it. That's the Who's whole deal. People try to put us down just because we get around. You put a little more stuttering in that, and that's the title track to this album right here. So very, very important in the annals of music history, I would say. Though if we move on, the next one isn't as much of a. It's a little more of a footnote in music history, unfairly I should say. Nina Simone, this is I Put a Spell on You, which might have been the peak of her mainstream appeal. Nina Simone had been absolutely tearing up the R&B charts in the early 60s, but I Put a Spell on You is probably when the rest of the world realized, wow, she's really got something special. And looking back in 2025, 60 years later, yeah, she really did have something special. Nina Simone might possibly be the best vocalist of all time, which is unfortunate for the rest of this list because it does mean it's all downhill from here. But we get to see who she introduces. This isn't much of a transition piece. It's mostly It's a lot of really good songs. Listen to it. It's a lot of really good songs. But that'll close out the '60s for us. Uh, so the next group of albums that we got here, 50 years. 50 is a crazy anniversary. That's a whole half century. All right, and we got some albums fitting to match that energy. We got some very important records here. First up, "Wish You Were Here" by Pink Floyd. I feel like there's not even anything else to be said about this album. I will mention the cover. This might be one of my favorite album covers of all time. It's a highlight in my collection. Uh, this was before VFX, so they literally did set a guy on fire to get this shot. But to the actual music, the meat of this record, it's bookended by the insane prog barn burner, "Shine On You Crazy Diamond," the 10 sweet, something like 20-minute song. Not even Pink Floyd's longest song, but it is an ode to Pink Floyd's original vocalist Syd Barrett, the man behind the machine. No, I'm very reverent of "Wish You Were Here," and I think it's definitely one that you should listen to. Take 40 minutes out of your day, or you can listen to it while you're washing dishes or whatever. It doesn't matter. Listen to Roger Waters wail on this thing. It's worth it. Next up, we actually got a repeat offender on this list. Oh, okay. The next one was originally going to be "Blood on the Tracks" by Bob Dylan, as Bob Dylan's second sneaky appearance on here, which I will touch on briefly before we get to Physical Graffiti, which is rearing its ugly head behind me. "Blood on the Tracks." If Highway 61 Revisited was the rock album, "Blood on the Tracks" is the one where Bob Dylan locks himself in his basement and cries on tape. It's a very, very personal album. Very introspective, very vulnerable songwriting. Some people say it's his best. I have to be in the right mood for it. Otherwise, meet me on Blonde on Blonde. That's my Bob Dylan. Hashtag not my Bob Dylan. I'm lying. I do quite like "Blood on the Tracks." But anyway, we will be moving on to the one that's actually here right now behind me, Led Zeppelin's "Physical Graffiti." Now, Led Zeppelin is kind of the poster child for '70s bands. They were like the Beatles of the '70s. Their careers bookended by the beginning of the end of the decade, just as the Beatles were, and their sound basically defined the entire decade. And here, right in the middle of the decade, in 1975, you probably have their beefiest beef Wellington of their discography, which is their double album epic, "Physical Graffiti." And wow, this thing is dense. There's some really dense blues rock on here. It's probably my favorite Led Zeppelin work. This or Led Zeppelin 4, which is probably that's the stock pick. So sometimes I'll be getting in my Physical Graffiti bag if I got an hour and a half to spare. While I'm here, I will touch on how absolutely huge double albums were in the '70s. This was Led Zeppelin's only double album, I believe, and you really, really got to be in the right mood for a double album. If you want an hour and a half of music, beginning to end, you got to be in the right headspace. But if you are in the right headspace, Physical Graffiti is a ride for the ages. You got to love it. But with that, we'll move away from Led Zeppelin. We'll give this slide a rest. It's been here for 2 whole album cycles for me. Next up, we got "Horses" by Patti Smith. This is another one that didn't get much recognition on release. Patti Smith. Oh, this is also a punk record. I mentioned that The Who kind of set the precedent for punk, but Patti Smith is another instance of proto-punk here because I feel like the beginning of punk proper you could probably match up with maybe the debut album by Television, or maybe the Johnny Rotten's band's debut. I won't say that. So won't say the name of the band on TV10, but running back to "Horses." Patti Smith is probably one of my favorite probably my favorite punk vocalist, I would say. She's the meat of "Horses" is her vocal performance. She wails on it. It's a sight to behold. It's an experience to be had. There's not really much I can say about "Horses." It's not Patti Smith's strongest record. I would probably give that to Easter, her third record, but that did not come out in 1975. This did, which is why I'm talking about it. But now we're going to stop talking about it, and we're going to move on to "Mothership Connection" by Parliament, George Clinton's, I wouldn't say magnum opus, but man, what a great piece of funk this is. This is probably the funk album. When two funk enthusiasts meet on the street and they start talking about true funk classics, this is what they're talking about. You gotta love the title track, Mothership Connection. You gotta love, I believe P-Funk is on this album. The namer of the subgenre that was headlined by George Clinton. Yeah, no, we got a nice George Clinton right here on the cover. This is the funkiest P-Funk that you can find anywhere. Listen to Mothership Connection. It's another one of my favorites from this year. Although moving on, moving more into the mainstream, we got A Night at the Opera by Queen. A little tidbit about this album. It was the most expensive album ever produced at that point in 1975. Freddie Mercury really went all out with the production here, and it shows in the music. This is the one that has Bohemian Rhapsody on it. There's really not much more I need to say. It's also a double album. Hello and Goodbye 1975. I'm glad that we don't have as many of those in the great year of 2025. No shade to Queen, though. Love Queen. Although we will stop talking about them now and move on to Bob Marley's live album, fittingly titled Live. It was his live album recorded at the Lyceum in London. This is the CD that I have in my collection that I have probably played the most out of any of them. I feel like it's always in my car. It's always, I love this. This is, if you want to listen to reggae, listen to this. This is like, Legend is probably Bob Marley's like studio opus because it's literally just a compilation of all his songs. But why would you listen to that when you can listen to a compilation of all his best songs recorded live? All right, it's worth it. Listen to Live. I love Bob Marley. Bob Marley was my introduction to the concept of music, but that's a story for another day. The story for today is that we're moving out of 1975 and into 1985 with all the albums that turned 40, or that are turning 40 this year. 40 is a very strange anniversary, and 1985 was a similarly strange year for music. It doesn't have as many barn-burning classics as the 70s did for me. So this segment will be comparatively short. But we will start off with probably my favorite album of the decade, actually. Glad that it ended up... Oh, okay, I may have put him in out of order. I was talking about Kate Bush's Hounds of Love, but we will talk about Tears for Fears' Songs from the Big Chair first. This was the mainstream record of 1985, Songs from the Big Chair. I believe this is the one that had Everybody Wants to Rule the World on it. Absolute classic, probably the best song of the 80s, and probably the most 80s song of the 80s. Yeah, this is synth pop at its finest. Tears for Fears, it's really, there's not much more I can say about this one. I'm probably going to be saying that a lot, but I feel like words can't do these albums justice mostly, and we cannot play them in their entirety on TV10, so listen to them on your own time instead. Next up, I believe we have Hounds of Love by Kate Bush. Okay, we do not. I'm going to concede that Kate Bush is probably not in this slideshow, but I will talk about her without her face here. Kate Bush is probably, in terms of vocal performance, second to Nina Simone, I think. And Hounds of Love was it was her chart peak and possibly her songwriting peak too. Running Up That Hill, you're familiar with that song from Stranger Things, or if you're cool, you know about that song from before Stranger Things used it. But Cloud Busting is on that one too. Oh, okay, that's a very personally important song for me. Cloud Busting is one of my favorite songs of all time, and find it only on Kate Bush's Hounds of Love. So good stuff. But now I will talk about the Tom Waits record that is right here behind me, Rain Dogs. Tom Waits is such an oddity. This album does not belong in 1985. It probably belongs more in 1905, maybe 1895. I don't know. Tom Waits. He has a sea shanty. He has like he's the type of voice that you would find on a 1700s trade vessel. Tom Waits, he has that gravelly voice, and he's always singing about tales of adventure. I do quite like Rain Dogs. It's probably my favorite Tom Waits record, although that honor might also go to Swordfish Trombones. But that one did not come out in 1985. This one did. That's why it's here. Let's move on. Next up is a record that I don't have as much of an attachment to, but I feel like it's historically important. It's Stevie Wonder's In Square Circle, which Stevie Wonder had an absolutely insane run of records in the 70s. He had Music of My Mind, followed up by Talking Book, followed up by Intervisions, followed up by Songs in the Key of Life. That is a string of records that is practically untouchable. And how do you follow that up? He was like, I guess I've been the best artist for a very long time. I think I'm ready to stop doing that and just be the biggest. Just the biggest, not the best. This was Stevie Wonder trying to be mainstream, and it kind of comes at the sacrifice of the music quality. Although that's just my opinion. I'm not a huge fan of In Square Circle, but this is when Stevie Wonder was very, very popular. Although not at the peak of his music quality. That would probably have to go to Intervisions or Songs in the Key of Life for me. But with that about rounds out 1985. Sorry to my Gen X parents that I did not include more records from 1985. I know there's probably a lot more that I'm missing. Hi, Mom. You can tell me what I'm missing later. But first, we have an ad for you guys to watch, so do that.
Do you need the closer? It's time. Bring in the closer. Alright, listen. Multiple choice versus short answer. Watch the curveball on question 8, alright? This teacher's a hard grader and it's a trick question, alright? Canvas is yours.
Now we're back here. Welcome back to this little walkthrough of albums with important anniversaries. And we'll be picking up 10 years after where we left off, which is 1995, with all the albums that are turning 30 in this great year of 2025. And something that the mid-90s was marked by, that the mid-80s wasn't, at least in terms of the mainstream scene, was hip-hop. Specifically, 1993's... okay, I was going to talk about Wu-Tang, but Wu-Tang didn't have a record that released in 1995, but a bunch of their members did. Which the first one here is Liquid Swords by the Genius Jizza. That is his rapper name. I touched on 1993 because that is when Wu-Tang's Enter the 36 Chambers came out. Or no, 36 Chambers Enter the Wu-Tang, excuse me. Which was probably the biggest hip-hop release the world had seen so far. And what it did was absolutely rocket to stardom every single member of the Wu-Tang, with the exception of maybe U-God and Master Killa. Everyone else, though, was chilling. Genius Jizza, for example, was hard at work on his solo project, his solo debut, Liquid Swords, which, okay, what an absolute classic of 90s hip-hop. There are some really cold beats on here by RZA. I should mention that even though this is technically a solo record, there are enough features on here and enough production by RZA that it's basically a sequel to Enter the Wu-Tang. No, highlight on this is probably Cold World, at least for me, but there's a lot of gold on here on Liquid Swords. Check it out. Glad it's turning 30. Next up, we got another Wu-Tang record, or another record from a member of Wu-Tang, which is Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links. This is it's more hardcore. It's more upbeat, perhaps feverish than Liquid Swords, because Liquid Swords is very low key, very in the pocket. Cuban Links is energetic. Cuban Links is Raekwon being in your face. You can see it in the cover there. It's the chef himself. It's him. It's him. What can I say? Yeah, probably not as good as Liquid Swords in my opinion, but it's another very much a hallmark of mid-90s hip-hop. And it's one that we still talk about here 30 years later. And on that note of other hip-hop records that came out this year, we got Mobb Deep's The Infamous. Also out of New York. I should mention Wu-Tang was out of New York. Mobb Deep, also New York. It was a very, very good time to be a New Yorker. A New Yorker and a hip-hop artist at the same time. Tribe Called Quest was making numbers in the underground scene, although not in 1995. That was more 1993's game. 1995's game is Mobb Deep, which, if Cuban Links was energetic but hot, with the fire on the cover and everything, Infamous is energetic but cold. Infamous is cruel. Infamous is violent, but it's also very, very, very good. All right, we got Prodigy and we got Prodigy rapping like crazy. We got the producer, whose name I may have forgotten. I'm very sorry. Uh, yeah, no, that one's gonna have to get left up to the left up to the annals of history to remember the other member of Mobb Deep's name, because I do not. Either way, The Infamous is definitely very worth checking out. It's another feather in the cap of mid '90s hip hop. But moving away from New York and into the South, we got Mystic Styles by 3 6 Mafia. And while it was not as much of a chart topper as Wu-Tang and Mobb Deep were, this is probably the most important album that came out in 1995 in terms of sound, because it would go on to define the sound of trap, which would go on to define the entire sound of 2010's pop. Everything, basically all the drums that you hear in any song between 2015 and 2020 can be traced back to this record right here. It's got a very gritty sound, very lo-fi production, courtesy of Memphis's finest. No, it's good. It's good. A lot of these albums, all I can say is that they're good, because we have a lot of them that we're going through. And that said, let's move on to the next one. The other hallmark of hip hop from the South in the '90s was Goody Mob's Soul Food. This one, you may not be familiar with Goody Mob, but you might be familiar with Outkast, made up of Andre 3000 and Big Boy. This was what they were up to before Outkast. They were having some soul food with Goody Mob. This is a very consistently good hip hop record, which, considering its length, is pretty impressive. No, this is a very, very long record, I think. I want to say it's like an hour and a half. So it's another double album, courtesy of the '70s. They're coming back. But Soul Food, good times. Good if you want to see what was going on in Atlanta before Outkast burned down the house. Next up, we're finally moving away from hip hop into what was going on in the rock scene in the mid '90s, and it was this little indie band. You may not have heard of them. They're called Radiohead, and this was their. It wasn't their debut record. Pablo Honey was their debut back in 1993, but this was. We can just ignore that one because the Benz is way better. High and Dry is the highlight off of this, in my opinion. It's just Tom York crooning over some good guitar. It's a good time. Benz is a good time. Next up, we got Björk's Post. We are moving away from rock. We didn't spend a lot of time in there because Post is electronic. It is Björk being herself, and it is probably her second best record, in my opinion. But it is definitely the one that defined the sound for her best record, which would be 1998's Homogenic. That sound of the strings combined with the electronic drums was set here back in 1995 with Post. It's a very colorful record. You can see from the cover. The sound matches that. Yeah, highlight would probably be Isabel or her cover of It's Oh So Quiet with the big band sound. But that's Post. Moving on, we got Brown Sugar by D'Angelo. This is we're hitting the genres one at a time now. This is 1995's greatest R&B project. This is D'Angelo's debut. He was up and coming. An artist who's been around since the 90s, but currently in 2025 only has 3 albums, which and they're all great, which possibly makes him the most consistent artist of all time. And it started here with Brown Sugar. He did all of the instrumentation on this record. Creates such a unique mood that really can't be topped, except maybe by him in his follow-up to this, which was 1999's Voodoo, and then 2013's Black Messiah. Both very, very good albums that we're not getting more in depth with right now, because this is about Brown Sugar, and Brown Sugar is quite good. Moving on. This is probably the most personally important to me record of 1995, which is Sublime's self-titled, released very, very soon before the untimely death of the frontman Brad Knoll. And what a swan song this record is. The closing track, Doing Time, with its vibraphone beat, it really says all you need to know about the band. I love Sublime. I love basically every single song on this album. There are many very good albums on here. This one probably has the highest subjective quality for myself. compared to its objective quality, which is probably not as good as most of the other ones that came before it in this list. I gotta love Sublime though, and that's why it's here. And that about rounds it out for the ones turning 30. Next we got our we're moving into the 2000s, which I don't really have much to say on, but we got some that are turning 20 here. So let's get into it with Gorillaz' Demon Days. This is what Damon Albarn got up to after Blur. I'm not a big fan of Blur, but I am a huge fan of Gorillaz, and Demon Days is probably their best record. They got an MF Doom feature on here. Anyone who knows me knows how big of a deal that is. It's on the track November Has Come. Check that one out. The rest of the album, it is very good also, but I gotta ride or die for November Has Come because of the Doom feature. That's why it's here. Feel Good Inc. is very good too. That's the one that got the radio airplay, and that's the one you probably know from this record. Moving on. We got B by Common. 2 one-word titles, because Common is honestly not a very good rap name because it's just one very common word. And B is not a very good album title because it's also just one very common word. But don't let that detract from the fact that B is a very, very solid hip-hop record, probably the most solid that 2005 had. That or Late Registration, which I'm not going to touch on because I don't want to talk about Kanye anymore, thank you very much. But B's very good. They got Jay Dilla production on here on the song Love Is. That might be one of Jay Dilla's best beats, which is a very big deal if you know anything about the man. Listen to Donuts, which came out in 2006. That's Jay Dilla's track, but this is Common's, and it's quite a good track indeed. Next up, we got Sufjan Stevens' second concept album that revolves around a single state, Illinois, which is a follow-up to his album Michigan, which is about a different state, probably Ohio or something. Don't ask me. Illinois, I like the idea of it. I say that like I'm setting up to say, but I don't like the album. But I really do like the album. I really do like Illinois. But you got to be in the right headspace for it. That at least for me. There's a lot that goes on Illinois. Highlight track for me is definitely Chicago. But the rest is also solid as well. Shout out Sufjan. I hope he makes the other 48 state albums soon enough. Next up, we got the 2 albums that System of a Down released in 2005. This is, and also the 2 most recent System of a Down albums, which is a fact that's very sad to me, as I love System of a Down. Which corollary to that, I love these 2 albums. They're probably my favorite System of a Down albums that are they're self-titled from 1999. But Mesmerize, absolutely great. Hypnotize, absolutely great. Very aggressive metal on here. Highlight tracks are probably BYOB on Mesmerize and Holy Mountains on Hypnotize. Although Hypnotize also has the song where he goes banana 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 terracotta, so points for that one. But that's all about all there is to say right now about System of a Down. Because if I talk any more about them, I will cry. So let's move away from 2005 and into 2015 with the songs that are turning 10. They're getting there. They're getting there in age. All right. One day these albums will be 50 years old, just like Pink Floyd. But right now they're in their relative infancy. So let's discuss. First up, we got To Pimp a Butterfly. It's To Pimp a Butterfly. Moving on, we got Rodeo by Travis Scott, which was the other big hip-hop release. Probably in the charts ended up being more popular than To Pimp a Butterfly, but obviously is nowhere near it in quality, as most albums are not anywhere near To Pimp a Butterfly in quality. Okay, I did say very little, but I will say highlight track on To Pimp a Butterfly is Wesley's Theory, the opener. It's got features with Thundercat, he did the bass on it, and George Clinton. So that's pretty cool, because you gotta love George Clinton. That technically makes his second appearance on this list after Mothership Connection by Parliament, a full 40 years earlier. But back to Rodeo. This is trap becoming mainstream. This is Mystic Styles set the precedent for what trap could sound like, and then it went dormant. Or at the very least, it was relegated to the Dirty South, to Atlanta, to Memphis. But Rodeo here and Travis Scott brought it back to the mainstream. And this is when Ariana Grande started using it. This is when it started appearing in other pop songs and country songs. Um, and the rest was basically history. So good job, Travis Scott, for being a part of said history. Shout out Travis Scott. Let's get you on the show one day. Next up, we got Currents by Tame Impala. Um, yeah, I really like Currents, but there's not really much that I'm able to say about it. Or not, I shouldn't say able. It's just that the whole album is one big vibe, basically. That's how Tame Impala is. Generally, my favorite record by him is Lonerism. But Currents is not Lonerism. Some people might say it's better. I don't. Nang's highlight track on here. And this will also not be the last we see of Tame Impala. Moving on. We got Summertime '06 by Vince Staples. A very low-key, I wouldn't say underground, but definitely not as popular as Rodeo, and definitely not as popular as To Pimp a Butterfly. North North was on this record, which is Vince Staples' breakout song, which I guess makes this Vince Staples' breakout record, which means that we have a lot to thank it for. Because without this, we would not have Big Fish Theory. Without this, we would not have his self-titled. So yeah, shout out Summertime '06 for all of that. And with that, that's about all we have for 2015. And so we got just one more era to talk about, which is the little baby albums that are turning 5. They came out in 2020. That makes them 5 right now. I hope that makes you feel old, because it does for me. Anyway, first one we got up here is Circles by Mac Miller, which I believe to be one of the best posthumous records ever released. Now, in 2025, we did get Balloonerism, which is an album that's turning 0 this year, which means I'm allowed to talk about it. But that's all I had to say about it, actually, is that it came out. So back to Circles. This was the first posthumous record that came out after Mac Miller. It was the first that anybody had heard of him, or first that anybody had heard from him since Swimming in 2018. And it continues what Swimming had going. The sound that you could hear in songs like Wings and Ladders, which were my 2 favorites off of Swimming, they come through here on Circles. The first 3, or no, not the first 3. The 3-track run of Complicated, followed by Blue World, followed by Good News. Absolutely insane 3-track run that kind of makes the whole album for me. But moving on to the next record we got for 2020, it is Alfredo by Freddie Gibbs and Alchemist. And these, Alchemist had been around for a long time. Freddie Gibbs had been around for a long time, but this is truly the moment when Freddie Gibbs collaborated with the Alchemist. It kind of speaks for, okay, that might not speak for itself if you don't know who those guys are, but the Alchemist is probably the best hip-hop producer that's making music right now, and Freddie Gibbs might be the most technically proficient technically proficient rapper to be doing stuff right now. So this is a super group right here on Alfredo. Shout out Frank Lucas, probably one of the highlight tracks for me. Frank Lucas, definitely. Something to Rap About featuring Tyler, definitely. And Scotty Beam. Scotty Beam might be the perfect hip-hop instrumental. It might be the best to ever do it. So shout out Alchemist for that one. Next up, we will be moving away from hip-hop with Fiona Apple's Fetch the Bolt Cutters, which was the first that anyone had heard from Fiona Apple since 2012, which made this very long-awaited, and it really did pay off. This is probably my favorite record by her, although it might be the recency bias talking. No, it's not. Fetch the Bolt Cutters is really, really, really good. The production on it is very intimate. You can compare it to Vespertine by Björk. They both have a lot of samples of common household sounds, as Björk did. Like forks being adjusted and stuff. It makes it feel very personal. And Fiona Apple's songwriting on here is also very personal and so good. Highlight track on here is Rack of His. The Plinky Mellotron notes that she's got on there are entrancing, mesmerizing. Definitely give it a listen. Next up, we got The New Abnormal by The Strokes. Believe it or not, the album was already called this before COVID hit. All right, the working title was The New Abnormal, which makes it a very, very timely release. But this was The Strokes' return to form. so to speak. It was basic. A lot of people thought that this was the best, their best work since their debut in 2001. Is This It? Which is a record that they have lived in the shadow of for the rest of their career. But the new Abnormal, it's more of the Strokes sound. I really like it, but I actually do like 2013's Calm Down Machine more, which is not very commonly seen. It's a bit of a hot take. So listen to Calm Down Machine, which came out in 2013. It is not turning any important age, but the new Abnormal is. So the new Abnormal is my vehicle to talk about Calm Down Machine. Listen to that one. Listen to the opener Tap Out. It's great. Oh, listen to Ode to the Mets on the new Abnormal. That's the highlight track from this one. Although next up, we got Tame Impala again. He's rearing his head again with the Slow Rush. I mostly like this one for the cover. If this came out in 2025, people would be calling the cover AI generated, but it's not. I just love it. It's a vibe, and it's a vibe that's matched by the sounds. Tame Impala is very big on the vibes. You know this, because I said it earlier, and you've been hanging on to every word I've said with rapt enthusiasm. So thank you very much for doing that. But the Slow Rush was a very inopportunely timed album because there are a lot of most of the tracks on here were meant to be played for audiences. This was supposed to be Tame Impala's breakout back onto the live scene, but then that didn't happen. That didn't happen for obvious reasons. But now he's touring again, and he's playing all these songs as they were meant to be played. So listen to these and then go see him live. And the last album that we got to talk about for 2020 is probably the one that's most important to me, which is Heaven to a Tortured Mind by Eve Toomer, also known as the album that got me through my junior year of high school. This is it was not a very chart-topping album, didn't come out to a lot of media attention, but it had that kind of slow success, that kind of Velvet Underground success, if you catch my drift. Heaven to a Tortured Mind, the production on it is so lush, so complex, so layered. It sounds like the 21st century, but also calls to mind some of the synth pop or I shouldn't say synth pop, but some of the distorted kind of murky underwater rock, a la Tears for Fears, a la My Bloody Valentine in the 90s. Standout track on here is probably Romanticist, but my personal favorite is easily, handedly Superstars with its guitar riff. It is a beautiful, entrancing listen, and it is one that has got me through many a time in my life. And with that, we are out of important years, or good round numbers for albums to be turning. So that's about all she wrote then. Thank you all very much for taking this walk with me through music history, and through some of these records. I sincerely hope you'll give them a listen. And as always, thank you very much for tuning in to Sounds of the Valley for this season and every other one, I guess. I'm going to assume that you've watched every single episode up to now. Thank you very much for tuning in to Sounds of the Valley. I've been your host, Evan Claymar, and I will see you in the fall for my final season as host. Good night, y'all.